review.
Oh, good. So another really good strategy is peer review. So there's a lot of places you can get feedback. You can get feedback from a friend, but I know many of you don't have any friends, so that was a joke. That was a joke. Don't edit that for YouTube. So one place to get peer feedback is a friend. Where else can you go for peer feedback? Oh yeah, you know how to get to my heart. The Writing Center. So you can drop by the Writing Center. A classmate might be another good one. Like, hey, I'll make you a deal. I'll give you feedback on your paper if you give me feedback on my paper. Why is it so good to get feedback from an outside reader when you're writing research papers? Why is that so important? Yeah, some perspective, right? Some outside perspective. One of the craziest things about writing, I think, is that you as the writer get so immersed in your topic, and you've been so isolated, really, as you're writing, usually, that you know exactly what you want to say and what you think you've said, but you haven't necessarily said that. Like, I write so many papers that I send off to try to get published, and I think, oh, this is the best paper, my arguments are awesome, I've got so much evidence, they're gonna love this, you know, and then I send it off, and in my area, when you're a professor, what you do is you send a paper into a journal to be published, and they give you feedback. And sometimes they say, oh, this is good, just tweak a few things and you're published. Sometimes they say, no, this stinks, forget it, you're not getting in. But what they usually say is, you know, we send it off to some readers and they have this feedback, so revise it and submit it again. And every time I send a paper off that I think is so awesome, I always get feedback. Explain this more. Develop this idea more. What did you mean by this? Your organization was a little confusing here. So even people who make their living writing, who are allegedly, you know, the Writing Center coordinator, allegedly a really good writer, right? I'm stamped, certified Writing Center coordinator. Even those type of people have trouble getting distance from their writing. And so every writer has trouble getting some perspective. So every writer needs readers. Writers need readers. And that could be a friend, a classmate, the Writing Center. But I think that's a really important tool during the research process. If you're just writing your papers by yourself and not getting any feedback, they're just not going to be as good because you just can't get the perspective. That was a tip from this group, right? So how about this group? Do you have another tip for the research process?
We came up with study groups.
Study groups, good. I think this depends a lot on your personality type. The research shows that students who are introverts, like, you know, they just like to work alone. Those students don't always do as well with study groups. Like, study groups actually can have a negative effect on those students. But students who are a little more extroverted, research has shown that when they work with others, they're more productive and they get more writing done. So if you're an extroverted type of student and you're writing all by yourself, think about it. You're not matching your writing habits with your learning style. So think about your learning styles. Do I like to be by myself or do I like to be with other people? If you like to be with other people, then I think study groups and the Writing Center are really good resources for you. How about another idea from this group?
Taking notes and paraphrasing.
Oh, good. Let's talk about that a little bit. Notes, paraphrasing. You didn't ask it in your questions, but I'm wondering, does anybody have any concerns or questions about, like, when to cite, when not to cite, how to paraphrase, how not to paraphrase? Do you have questions about that?
Yeah.
Do other people have questions? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. So you're taking notes, you're reading, and you're going to integrate some of that research into your papers. And the question is about, like, paraphrasing and quoting. Okay, let me ask you some questions about that. Let's say you're reading a journal article or a newspaper article, and you like what the author has to say. There's a paragraph that you really like. And let's say you say, okay, I want to use that. But you don't want to use it exactly like the author said it, so you change a few words. You tweak a few words, put a few words in your own words. and you plop it in there. Is that plagiarism? Or is that okay?
Plagiarism.
Plagiarism? What if you cite it?
No.
No? Is it okay if you cite it? I'm seeing a lot of somewhat unsure looks. So the deal on that is, if you take something from a source and just tweak a few words and put it in there, that's a no-no. You definitely want to cite it. You definitely want to cite it. So anything you get from a source, you want to cite. However, if you just take something from a source and just change a few words, like it's 3 or 4 or 5 sentences, and you just kind of copy and paste it into your research paper, but just change a few little words, even if you cite it, technically that's plagiarism. And the reason why is, what you're telling the reader is, these are basically my ideas. I might have gotten some information from the source, I cited it, but it's basically my language, because you haven't quoted it, right? You haven't quoted it, you're just paraphrasing it. You're putting it in your own words. But what paraphrasing really means is taking another author's ideas and really putting it in your own language, your own words. Not just like changing this word, like going to the thesaurus, almost couldn't get that out. Going to the oh, I did it again. I have some kind of mental block on thesaurus. Going to the thesaurus and just changing a few words here and there, even if you cite it, technically you're not supposed to do that. If you really want to paraphrase something, you have to put it in your own words. Your language, your sentences, your words. It doesn't have to be your ideas, but it has to be your words. And then you just need to make sure that you cite it. That's paraphrasing. So if you ever find yourself taking 2 or 3 sentences and changing a few words around and then plopping it in there, cease and desist. Don't do that. Because technically that's plagiarism. It's not the worst kind of plagiarism, because if you're citing it, you're acknowledging that you're getting this from another source. But if you find yourself just changing a few words around, what you should really do is quote. If you need to use an author's pretty much to use their language, you should quote. Every time you paraphrase, you cite. Every time you quote, you cite. Every time. Yeah? So whenever you quote, you want to cite it. And of course, with APA style, the emphasis is on always giving the year, the author, and the page number. That's the emphasis on APA style. And how many people know, okay, now we're going to get deep. Ready to get deep? How many people know why APA emphasizes the year? Like in MLA, the style we use in the humanities, you don't even put the year until the very end, until the works cited page. But in APA, in the reference page and right in the text, you always put the year. Why is that so important in APA? Why do you think they emphasize that? Any speculation? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, you go ahead.
Maybe it might not be relevant anymore.
Good. That's it. That's it. You nailed it. The reason why APA is so focused on the year is that research in the social sciences usually needs to be like relevant, recent, right? Like you folks usually don't cite research from 1960s unless you're doing like a historical thing. Whereas in the humanities, we might cite like Plato and Aristotle. And that's fine. It's still relevant. And so the year doesn't matter as much in the humanities. Because usually you're talking about ideas and not research. But in the social sciences, usually you're dealing with research, like studies and experiments and, interviews with people and that kind of thing. And so the date is really relevant. And readers need to know that, oh, I trust this author. He or she is using the most recent research. So that's why year is emphasized in APA. So in case you're ever wondering, staying up late at night going, why is the year emphasized in APA? Why? I know that bothered many of you. Now you can finally get some sleep at night. So if nothing else, you'll be able to sleep. So that's paraphrasing versus citing. Now, if you have a paragraph or a couple paragraphs where you're doing a lot of paraphrasing of one source, let's say you have a whole paragraph where you're doing quite a bit of paraphrasing, putting it in your own words, but using ideas from a source. You don't have to cite it every time you do it. So you don't have to cite every single sentence. If you have a paragraph that has a lot of paraphrase in it, you can just cite at the very end of the paragraph. If you're switching between more than one source, then you might cite. So as you switch sources, you need to cite. But if you're using pretty much one source in one paragraph, you can save it for the very end. The exception to that is every time you quote, you need to cite. Every time you quote someone, you need to cite it. In other words, put the page number. Yeah, and the author. Let us know who the author is. So I don't remember how we got on this, but somebody said something about paraphrasing, and that's how we got on it. Do you have? I just gave you kind of the quickie overview of paraphrasing, quoting, and citing. Do you have questions about it still? Yeah, go ahead.
Sometimes I have trouble trying to paraphrase it because it sounds really good, so I just like.
Right, you want to use it, right? So let's say you have something that sounds really good, like a whole paragraph or 3 or 4 sentences. What'd you do? You said it. Block quote. Block quote. Have you heard of block quote before? Does that sound familiar? A block quote is when, I think with APA, I'm not sure, I have to look at the style manual, I don't have it all memorized. But I think a block quote is when you have 3 lines or more. So you're doing a quote that has 3 sentences or more. Whenever you have a quote that's 3 sentences or more, don't totally quote me on that. It might be 4 sentences, it might be more than 2, but you can look at the APA style manual if you really want to get into the details of that. But it's a long quote with multiple sentences. Whenever you do that in APA style, so you're writing this paragraph and now you want to do a block quote. You do the block quote separately. It's almost like starting a new paragraph with, I'll have to double check with APA style, but I believe it's the same indent that you do for starting a new paragraph. I don't know if I'm making myself very clear. But, so you have a paragraph, you're paraphrasing, you're making your argument, blah, 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 and then you want to hit them with a nice, long, juicy quote. 3, 4, 5 sentences. You take that quote, you make it to a new paragraph, you move the whole quote goes over the same indent, so you indent the whole thing, the length of that you would indent a new paragraph. This is all in the APA style manual, so I don't need to get too much into it. And you don't need to put quotes on it, because once you've indented it, you're telling the reader this is a quote. This is a block quote. So it doesn't need quotes. You do need to cite it. You need the page number and the source, the author, the year, all of that. But you don't need to put in quotes. And that's a block quote. So block quotes are really good for, I want to quote something, it's really long, I can't really paraphrase it because I can't really capture it in my own words, or I like the author's tone and style, I want to capture the author's tone, then you could use a block quote. Yeah? Does that make sense?
Or what if you just incorporate it into your paper? Can you do that? Or?
So let's say, it sounds like what you're asking, tell me if I got this right. You have a big long quote, and you're just like incorporating parts of it?
Yeah, like according to so-and-so say,
right.
He says, and then you quote.
So if you do that, according to Rodriguez, I'm just making up a name. And then in APA, you always do the year, right? According to Rodriguez, comma, blah, blah, blah. And then you have a page number. Oh, I should have reviewed my APA style. I can't remember if it's, I think it's a P there.